Hi guys, today I'm going to do a short video on complex and imaginary numbers. And you may be thinking numbers are already complex and I don't want to imagine them, but they are necessary for what we are going to do with polynomials and roots. So here's a little intro video to what we want to do. So far in your guys' math careers, you guys have worked with what we call real numbers. Real numbers can be rational or irrational, and rational numbers break down into integers, natural numbers, the counting numbers, things like that. You may have noticed at some point in your math careers that if you take a square root of a negative number, let's say -1, that you guys on a calculator, it'll say error. And it says error because your calculators are programmed to only calculate using real numbers. But really, in math, there is another field which is called imaginary numbers. So there's real numbers, then there's imaginary numbers. So imaginary numbers. Okay, so imaginary numbers are numbers that are based off of the number I. So I is a number, which you may be thinking, no, it's not, it's a letter. But it is in fact a number, and in math, I, or in fact, I squared is equal to -1, okay? So this is an assumption that you'll have to come to and just accept with me, because it is pretty crazy to imagine that, but I squared equals -1. Okay, so if I was going to take the square root of -1, that is just I. I equals the square root of -1. Okay, so when you do that on your calculator, your calculator does not have I in its programming. So you just need to know that to get squares of numbers, of negative numbers, we are actually going to start using the number I. So if, for example, I wanted to take the square root of -4, what that is I would break this into two things. So you guys may remember how to split apart your numbers under the square root. So this is a -1 times a 4, right? Okay, so now I know what the square root of -1 is. I can pull that out. The square root of -1 is just, in fact, I equals I, and then the square root of 4 is 2, so I'm actually going to switch the order. So square root of -1 is I, the square root of 4 is 2, so we end up with 2I. So 2I is actually the square root of -4. We'll practice more moving forward, but you should also know that these two fall under the category of complex numbers. So complex numbers are numbers that have the form a plus bi, where a and b are constants. So a could be any number, b could be any number, any real number actually. So any number that has this form, and every number that we will deal with, has the form a plus bi. So normally, real numbers are complex numbers where b equals 0. So it's just a plus 0i, which is just a. So that might just be 3 or 10 or pi. And imaginary numbers are numbers where a equals 0 and b does not equal 0. So a equals 0, b does not equal 0. So this could be 4i, 10i, any number like that, okay? Complex numbers are combinations of both. So when we look at roots, moving forward, we can have numbers that are like 3 plus 2i, and then 4 minus I. Those are examples of complex numbers. They are all versions of complex numbers, but this is the general form that complex numbers have. So this is an introduction, just an introduction to imaginary numbers and complex numbers. which we are going to be working on more in the future, especially when we turn to roots of polynomial functions. So if this is a little bit overwhelming, it's okay, that's normal, but we'll talk about it more. If you have any questions, please let me know.